In a surprising ruling today, the United States Supreme Court said, yeah, you absolutely can regulate those so-called ghost guns, and the Biden administration's rules on registering them are legal and enforceable. So this whole case centers around the rules that were enacted by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, the ATF, during the Biden administration that would govern how these firearms that are 3D printed or assembled using kits and parts are regulated. The rule said those who make or sell those kits must comply with the Gun Control Act of 1968 by securing federal licenses, conducting background checks, keeping sales records, and marking their products with serial numbers. It also said the frame or receiver of such a weapon should be treated as a firearm, therefore that too, even if sold separately, would be subject to licensing, background checks, and serial number requirements. The rule was enacted because of the explosion of the use of these so-called ghost guns to commit crimes and law enforcement's inability to trace those guns. Well, in 2022, gun manufacturers sued the Biden administration, saying weapons parts and kits or unfinished frames or receivers cannot be considered firearms under the legal definition. In 2023, a federal judge in Texas and the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals agreed with the gun manufacturers, saying those rules are not consistent with the Gun Control Act. Parts and kits, receivers, and frames cannot be considered firearms. Therefore, the rule is illegal. Today, 7 justices said both of those lower courts were wrong. Conservative Justice Neil Gorsuch wrote the majority opinion saying the GCA, the Gun Control Act, embraces and thus permits ATF to regulate some weapon parts, kits, and unfinished frames or receivers, including those we have discussed. Now, this is a significant ruling from this particular conservative supermajority Supreme Court, which has really upended the way guns are regulated in this country. In this particular case, the majority opinion also pointed to the need for such a regulation because of how prevalent these so-called ghost guns have become in the commission of crimes. Justices Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito both dissented. Justice Thomas said because Congress in that 1968 law did not specifically say that gun parts are considered firearms, this regulation cannot stand. Obviously, the majority disagreed with him. In today's order, the majority also said there is a possibility that some parts and kits may fall outside of this regulation, but most fall well within it. So what does this mean? Well, back in 2023, in a 5-4 ruling, this same Supreme Court said this so-called ghost gun rule could take effect while the case continued to play out. So the reality is these rules have been in effect, have been used, and now they will continue to be in effect and will continue to be used while this case continues to be litigated to see which parts and kits may fall outside of the regulation. So if you want to read the Supreme Court ruling and the dissent, I'm going to email it out in tonight's Facts HQ email. So we do not know what's going to be happening with TikTok in just a few days. I highly suggest you sign yourself up for that free email so you can make sure you stay connected to me.